Good morning, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Oleksii Matsuka. I am the editor of TV programs produced by TV channel DOM. I would like to welcome you all to this discussion devoted to international cooperation toward peace in East Ukraine. I'm greatly honored to have this opportunity to chair this event. I'm so excited to see all of our honored guests of the event here and also those who have joined us via Zoom. Ambassador of Federal Republic of Germany, Anka Filduzen, good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to meet you. Ambassador of the European Union, head of the European Union delegation to Ukraine, Matti Maasikas. Good morning. Hi. Ambassador of Sweden to Ukraine, Tobias Tiberg. Good morning, Tobias.
Good morning.
Yeah, and our Zoom participants, Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, Minister of Reintegration of the Temporarily Occupied Territories, Oleksii Reznikov. Good morning, Alexei Yurievich. Former US Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations and Distinguished Fellow Center for European Policy Analysis, Kurt Volker from Washington, D.C. Ambassador of France to Ukraine, Etienne de Ponsen. Good morning, Mr. Ambassador.
Good morning.
Chargé d'affaires of the Embassy of Canada in Ukraine, Ruslan Katz.
Good morning.
And Ambassador of the United Kingdom to Ukraine, Melinda Simmons, also with us. Good morning, Melinda. Hi. I know some of the participants personally, and we have been in contact in different circumstances. I remember a huge contribution of the partners of Ukraine to the peace process and the reintegration. I have worked for the civil society sector in Donetsk since 2010. It was an extremely hard time, and I can frankly say that the impact of this help was crucial for me and for many of my colleagues from independent media NGO sector. It helped the civil society in Donetsk and Luhansk to continue our work despite the conflict and pressure of self-proclaimed authorities. I appreciate the support of different media projects which we have implemented in the Donbas region. It's Donbas Public TV, and later it was Donbas Media Forum. I have worked more than 6 years producing content for citizens of Ukraine who live in the temporary uncontrolled territory, and I'm happy to say that now, eventually Ukraine is beginning special broadcasting for this part of Ukraine. It's a huge step toward the reintegration and reaching peace in our country, and it will definitely help the implementation of Zelensky peace plan, which he announced during the presidential election. The real ceasefire has been reached for the first time since the beginning of the conflict. The ceasefire, which has been observed since the 27th July, helped to save dozens of civilian and military lives. Ukraine can win the battle for sympathies of people in NGCA area. For this reason, Russia and occupation structures blocked all humanitarian initiatives of Ukraine and blocked the signal of our TV channel DOM for that territory. Frankly speaking, they are afraid of our activities because they understand where the sympathies of the Donbas people are in reality. The current goals of Ukrainian government are rescuing people in the east of Ukraine struggling with inequality and providing new opportunities for all Ukrainian citizens, especially for those who live in Donetsk and Luhansk during this time. It's not possible without the help of partners whose ambassadors are here in this room. And also, Ukrainian Vice Premier Oleksii Reznikov is here too, and now the floor is given to Oleksii Reznikov, whom I would ask about next. Where do Ukrainian government, Alexei, directs its efforts to stop the conflict in Donbas, and what are the main challenges, your experiences in this process?
As for our plans today, the ministry is independent of the negotiations and the level of the Normandy format, at the level of the Minsk platform, as you know. I'm also a member of the Ukrainian delegation, the trilateral contact group, so certain dualism is present in my activities. But today I just wanted to talk more about the work of the government related with the reintegration of the temporarily occupied territories. Today there are certain things that fortunately can already be announced as a completed project and which will be implemented. As you know, we made a presentation on November the 10th, 2020, in the village of Shastya, It is a new service center that provides legal services for citizens of Ukraine who live both in the occupied territory and in government-controlled territory. It is their opportunity to use public services. There is an administrative services center, a postal service, a store for buying small goods for travelers. There is a medical center for mothers and babies. This is an opportunity to purchase goods in a pharmacy and much more. This was the first project, and we say that Shastya is a standard, and accordingly on December 16th, in Novotroitsk, this is in Donetsk region, we will open exactly the same service center. And in 2021, in our plans, all the remaining 8 which are on the contact line, including Kherson region, on the administrative border with Crimea. All these services will have similar unified hubs that will provide a service area for people. Let me remind you that the unofficial slogan of our ministry is for people and about people. And of course, this activity is also possible thanks to the assistance of our international partners. Yesterday, I had a conference with our partners who represent the UN in Ukraine. They have invested a lot of efforts and resources, including financial aid, to help us with the discovery and filling with equipment. For example, Administrative Services Center in the village of Shastya. In terms of the help from other states, there is a simple example. Yesterday, there was a presentation of the book by Stas Oseyev, a prisoner of the isolation concentration camp in the Donetsk region, who, as you know, spent more than 20 months in captivity. Yesterday, there was a presentation of his book, and thanks to the help of the Canadian Embassy, this book will be translated into English, so that our international partners can read in the original about what is happening in this terrifying, hellish prison called isolation. Today, our plans include maximum digitalization of the provision of services for citizens who live in the uncontrolled territories and for internally displaced persons. Today, the certificate of the representative of internally displaced persons is available in electronic form in the DIA application. Starting next year, the e-Malatko project for the babies, will be launched for citizens who live in the uncontrolled territories. And all this will simplify people's lives and help them to feel less hostage to the occupied regimes. By the way, the compensation for lost housing has been included, and 34 families have already received 300,000 hryvnias each. And I'd like to remind you that this is not a full replacement for their lost housing, but the fact of compensation for the destruction they received as a result of the war. There are many other plans in the ministry, but there are 2 global ones. The global plan is a legal solution to many accumulated problems. We are almost done with the transition and public policy bill. It will be sent to all ministries for approval and subsequently submitted to the parliament. The purpose of this law is to incorporate all laws drawn in the context of the Russian occupation, which started in 2014. This is to provide and clarify the procedure for the admitting of documents and transactions that occur in the occupied territories, to create a center for documenting the consequences of an international military conflict and ensuring the right for justice. This includes commemorating the memory of the victims of military aggression. This is the determination of procedure for formation of transitional administrations, legislative bodies, procedures for preparing for elections, training personnel, as well as other moments of transition to normal life after the deoccupation. The procedure for amnesty and prosecution, including lustration. Regarding the amnesty, I would like to add that it will be clearly noted who exactly does not fall under the amnesty, since we will apply the UN principles that stand sacredly guarding the right of the victim, the right to truth, the right to justice. All war crimes, crimes of aggression against will, honor and guiding, against sexual freedom, all of these will be punished regardless of the limitation period. This will be a great signal both to the occupied territories and to our international partners. The second block is undoubtedly the strategies of economic development of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, which are currently at the stage of consolidating the concept, which is going to be approved by the Cabinet of Ministers this month. Today, all approvals have been mostly completed, and on the basis of this concept, I think there will be a presidential decree, and subsequently a law of Ukraine that will regulate the introduction of a special regime. Now there is a discussion whether it will be a free economic zone or a priority development area. There are discussions between economists and lawyers ongoing, but in any case, the point is that we need to compensate for the losses that Ukraine suffered, both in money and in property of the territories as a result of military aggression. The well-known expert Anders Ostlund estimates the amount of Ukraine's loss from the Russian aggression in Crimea and Donbas at least as $100 million. The Vienna Institute for Economic Research has calculated that the minimum restoration of the Donbas region solely will require about $21 billion. Of course, we cannot restore the economy of Donbas with the help of the Ukrainian budget or donor assistance or credit programs. Therefore, we are talking about creating conditions for attracting investments, first of all, in the government-controlled territories of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and subsequently modifying this model in the occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk regions.
Oleksii, may I interrupt you now here, please, because we have a little time for that. Yes, thank you for your speech, thank you for your thoughts. And I know that you should leave us at this time. Thank you for your opening remarks for this round table. And we continue work here in the studio of our TV channel. And I want to repeat my question for two participants here in the studio. Where do foreign governments direct your countries, their efforts to stop the conflict in Donbas? And what are the main challenges you're experiencing in this process? Ambassador Matsuka, please, your time for this.
Thank you very much. The European Union has put its whole weight behind the Minsk agreements and behind also our member states, Germany and France, who are participants. As well as to the decisions of the Normandy Four summit, Paris summit, December last year. So we are doing everything to help facilitate the negotiating and settlement process. Secondly, the European Union has actually put its whole policy towards Russia dependent on how Russia fulfills Minsk agreements. One very vivid example of this are the EU sanctions against Russia that were again prolonged last week. So there is a consistent policy on that in our view will help towards a final settlement. And the EU is giving massive assistance and help. Since 2014, the EU has been given 154 million euro humanitarian help to people on both sides of the contact line. And we have given 600 million euro to the eastern Ukrainian region. And the day when the settlement comes, and reintegration can start also on the other side of the contact line, I'm sure we are ready to consider giving more.
Okay, and I would ask, please, Ambassador of France, Etienne de Pensin, please, your opinion about that and your answer.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I want to continue in what Matti has said. Just to tell that for France, there is a political dimension to invest in the Donbas area and to make some very visible projects for the population and for the inhabitants of the region. And I don't want to take too much of your time, but I just want to highlight one flagship project, which is a Mariupol water facility. We have decided to answer positively to the question or to the request made by President Zelensky during the Mariupol Forum in 2019 last year, to be more visible and to put a lot of investment into this area. So I'm pleased to share with you that this flagship project has started in Mariupol, and then in 3 years from now, there will be drinkable water in Mariupol. It is very important to demonstrate that the international support of France and others has a real impact on the ground, and that it could change the life of ordinary people living there. And if you want, I can enter into detail, but I want to say that this project has been backed by a French Treasury loan, a very interesting financial instrument with a grace period of 10 years on a very low interest rate. And this has made this project possible, feasible. And following this success, this ongoing success, we will replicate the same kind of project, but this time in the north of the Donbas region, in the Luhansk area, and we are ongoing to implement in the coming months this second project in this area. The first one in Mariupol, just to give you the amount of the project, is 67 million euros, and the second one in Mariupol, in Luhansk region, will be 70 million. And maybe a last point on that second one, it is also interesting from a political perspective because it will provide water not only for inhabitants of the control area of Donbass, but also for inhabitants of the non-controlled areas of Donbass, of the occupied territories. So there will be also, if it's correctly implemented, an impact on the population of the Donbass who are not under the control of the authorities in Kyiv. So we will try to reduce the impact of the contact line in the key area of the water.
Thank you. And next answer we are waiting from Anka Feldhusen, who German ambassador to Ukraine.
Thank you, Oleksii. Germany, as part of the Normandy Four, stands very firmly on Ukraine's side to try to end the war in Donbass. My colleagues in Berlin are working extremely hard every day to try to find little compromises, solutions, how to make progress on the path of solution of this conflict. This is something ongoing. This will, I think, last longer, but we will not give up, and we will always be helping Ukraine in this on this way. On the other side, Germany is the single biggest bilateral donor in terms of humanitarian aid, with almost 140 million since 2014. And our help is mainly directed towards social infrastructure along the contact line. Our aim is to support municipalities who have welcomed most of the IDPs after 2014. And we invest in social infrastructure that will help everybody: kindergartens, schools, hospitals, cultural institutions. The idea being to make also that really hard-hit part of Ukraine welcoming for people not only from the non-controlled territories who decide to cross the line, but also for the inhabitants in the controlled territories, with the aim really to make Ukraine such a welcoming, prosperous and successful country that in the end some kind of coming back of the territories will almost be normal, a little bit as in Germany. I think the fact that West Germany was such a successful country contributed a lot to the reunification in 1989.
Thank you. And please, we are waiting an answer from the Ambassador of United Kingdom to Ukraine, Melinda Simmons. Melinda, your mic.
Thank you very much. Good morning. So, of course, the UK fully supports the Minsk agreements and the peaceful resolution of the conflict. As my colleague Oleksii Matsuka said, the only way to end this conflict is for Russia to withdraw its weapons, its military personnel, stop supporting the armed formations that it backs, and abide by the commitments of the Minsk agreements that it signed up to. It's, of course, really distressing and continues to be so that civilians are still bearing the brunt of this conflict with fear of shelling, even though, of course, it's brilliant to see that that's reduced recently with the ceasefire. But the threat of landmines, the threat of explosive remnants of war and daily hostilities, to have to live with that is enormous for people who are resident there, including the impact on their mental health. And of course, COVID-19 has thrown additional challenges at that region. In this last financial year, the UK allocated more than £40 million for Ukraine to promote stability, to help Ukraine's post-COVID recovery in that region. We support defence, economic development and governance reforms, and that covers stabilisation activity in the region. And a lot of that is about defence reform, peace building, tackling corruption, increasing civilian oversight. In the conflict-affected parts of the country particularly, I think I'm quite proud of the work that we do to support ICRC, covering the rehabilitation of water, sanitation and health infrastructure, tracing missing people, reuniting families who have been separated by conflict, providing essential household supplies. And of course, I continue to think that demining is still important, and Halo Trust, who we've been supporting, has been doing some fantastic work enabling fields to be used again by their owners, and also running out mine risk education, which is reducing the risk of injuries. I want to make a pitch, actually, at this point about inclusive peace. Because if we want to talk about long-term achievable peace, then the reintegration and peace process has to be inclusive. Women and men have got different experiences of the conflict resolution, and of reconstruction. And any peace and security mechanisms, no matter how we try them, are going to need to understand that and address the security needs of all people, which means that the voices of men and women from conflict-affected populations in the government-controlled and the non-government-controlled areas are going to need to be heard and included in that decision-making. And that's important because we know for a fact that when women participate in peace building and conflict resolution, that increases both the quality of the peace, but also how long it lasts. When you have women participating in peace processes, the resulting agreement, 2/3 more likely to succeed, 1/3 more likely to last for at least 15 years. I would have thought that's an investment worth working towards. And finally, I want to touch on disinformation, which is a huge issue for all countries, but for Ukraine as a whole and for the conflict in the East. This continues to be almost as big a threat, really, as the use of weapons, and is an area in which the UK is investing increasingly in helping to tackle. It really is something that needs a strategy that's comprehensive, that it's coordinated between all stakeholders to try and counter that threat, which is so difficult to manage. And one of the ways of managing it is through free and fair public service media, such as this. And that needs to be working on both sides of the contact line to ensure that Donbass remains on the national agenda, and that the general public are hearing about it, and that political decisions become well-informed, and elections, whenever the time comes for that, can be conducted in a free and fair environment. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. And now I want to invite to the short speech Ambassador of Sweden to Ukraine. Please, your opinion about the situation with the Ukraine, Donbas, and international cooperation for that.
So first of all, I want to say, Oleksii, that Sweden firmly supports the position that my EU colleague Matti mentioned earlier. As a member of the European Union, we firmly stand behind the EU's policy that relations with Russia cannot go back to normal until Russia fulfills the Minsk agreements and contributes to the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. So that's a very important point. Secondly, next year, in 2021, Sweden will be chairing the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which mediates the conflict between the two conflicting parties, Ukraine and the Russian Federation. We'll be trying to work very closely with our colleagues, Germany and France, who lead the Normandy talks, which is the political framework which sets the impulse for conflict resolution in Ukraine. And we'll be doing our very best to support the mediating role of the OSCE between Russia and Ukraine. I want to say something also about the humanitarian situation. As the second largest donor country among the EU member states, after Germany, to Ukraine, Sweden is involved in very many different activities, both on the development side and the humanitarian side. But I want to speak particularly about the humanitarian situation in eastern Ukraine today. It is difficult because the pandemic or the pandemic has been used as a pretext to close the contact line and make it more difficult for humanitarians to cross between occupied parts of Ukraine and the rest of the country. As chair of the OSCE, we will be doing the very best we can to make sure that that pretexts cannot be used to prevent the movement of civilians from occupied parts of Ukraine to non-occupied parts of Ukraine. And this is something, without a resolution to that issue, it will be very difficult to get to the core of some of the pressing humanitarian issues facing Donbas today. Finally, you asked about the gaps, what's preventing a resolution of this conflict. And unfortunately, this conflict will not be resolved until Russia returns to what we call the European Security Order. The European Security Order says three things. It says that borders cannot be violated in Europe. It says that conflicts must be resolved by peaceful means. And it says that each country has the right to choose its own path. Those three core principles of European security have been violated in Ukraine. And that's the reason why Ukraine will be at the very top of Sweden's agenda when we chair the OSCE next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Tobias. And next voice from Washington, D.C. We know about the turbulent time in USA now, but we have a special voice from the United States, and this is Kurt Volker, please.
Good morning. Well, I think the key gap in Donbas is Russia's political will. Russia wants to keep the conflict going because it puts pressure on Ukraine. And I think that Western governments need to see that very clearly and to be very clear about forcing President Putin to at least recognize Russia's responsibility in order to negotiate a solution. If Russia does not want to solve this, they won't do so. And the Ukrainian government and Western governments can wish for peace all they want, but it is really in Putin's hands to stop the war. Well, I think that it has clarified things a little bit in the United States, that Russia is an aggressor, that Ukraine is the victim. There is a permanent non-recognition of Russia's seizure of Crimea, and it has increased U.S. support for Ukraine, both in terms of sanctions against Russia, which will not be going away, economic and development assistance, judicial and rule of law assistance, and security assistance as well, including lifting the ban on lethal military. So I think it has clarified the situation and increased the desire of people in the United States to try to assist Ukraine become a normal part of the transatlantic community.
I hope Ruslan Katz now on the in the air and with us through Zoom. And Ruslan, I want to ask you this question also about where do foreign governments direct their efforts to stop the conflict in Donbass and what the main challenges you're experiencing in this process, please.
Thank you very much, Oleksii. Dobre utro. It's a great honor to be part of this panel. I hope you can hear me. So I will just say very rapidly, so many important things have already been said. On the political track, obviously, we all understand that the solution to the conflict is in the hands of one man in one capital, President Putin, and we will continue to work with our partners to have a very, very strong position to denounce the Russian aggression, the Russian illegal occupation of Crimea, the Russian aggression in Donbass, and to work closely in different multilateral fora, OSCE, UN, NATO, G7, to pressure Russia through sanctions and other means to stop its aggression. On the rest of our work in the Donbass, I would like maybe to address three different points. I think that it is very important to acknowledge as of today that transitions are very complex processes and that the transition of peace will be a very tough process for Ukraine as well, and that reintegration and reconciliation will bring lots of vulnerabilities to the whole Ukrainian society. And I think that there is a need to think about that as of today. I very much welcome what Vice Prime Minister Reznikov said about the service delivery points. We believe as well that there is a need to build the trust of the Ukrainian populations in Donbas towards their own government. And we're obviously very proud to be supportive, and we are very proud for the people to know that Canada and other partners are behind them. But I think it is really crucial for the Ukrainians in the East to know that Kiev is behind them, that the Ukrainian government cares about them. And so therefore, I think that this shift of the paradigm, для людей, pro людей, is extremely important. And so we have been supporting the delivery of mobile service delivery points, 10 of them in the Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, to make sure that the vulnerable populations impacted by the conflict have a quick and easier access to the Ukrainian services and benefits, and that we try to alleviate the cost and the burden of time, physical effort, costs, etc. So I think this is really, really key for the people to feel that Kiev is with them and supports them. Secondly, I think it's extremely important to make sure that people in Donbas, that the Ukrainians in Donbas feel that they have opportunities to grow, to prosper, to get education, to get jobs in their own region. And here as well, we do welcome Vice Prime Minister Reznikov's efforts for the economical recovery of the Donbas. Canada, we have announced this week new projects of $25 million, which will be aiming to create economical opportunities for the vulnerable populations of Ukraine, for women, for IDPs, for women in the countryside, provide training, professional development, micro loans, once again to create opportunities for the people in Donbas to live, to prosper, to create jobs, and for them to see a future for them and for their families in their own region. And thirdly, I would say it is very important to start as of today a dialogue, a national dialogue, a national conversation about what peace means, what reintegration means, what reconciliation means. And I completely agree with Ambassador Siemens that peace has to be inclusive. Ukrainians have suffered so much from the conflict. Those who live in the NGCA, those who have suffered for the last 7 years, but also those across the whole country who have lost family members in the war. Let's not forget also the impacts of the Russian disinformation campaigns, the anti-Ukrainian narrative which is being built. And so I think that it is important to think as of today, how do we bring women, IDPs, veterans, youth, civil society across the whole country, how do we create a platform for a dialogue about what peace means, what should happen after the political and the military reintegration of the Donbas. Without that, reintegration will not be fully successful. And we as Canada, as we look for the future of our support, lots of our priority will go into that direction, create opportunities and make sure that all those Ukrainians who are ready for a dialogue, for a conversation, which will be tough, which will be complex, have an opportunity to do that. And we believe that those conversations are very complex, delicate, tough, and that's why I think we as Canadians, given our unconditional love for Ukraine, I think that coming from a place of love, we are committed to support those processes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruslan. I really appreciate the contribution of all of your countries for security, for reintegration, for reconciliation plan. It's really big job and big work for average people who live in now NGCA area, because it's really important, and I feel this supporting from Western allies, Western partners of Ukraine. How does it work? And it's really important. Thank you. We have very little time for our conversation, so I want to ask you next question about the main and working mechanism to stop Russia aggression against Ukraine. It is a sanctions, and I want to ask Oleksii Reznikov about his estimation. Alexei Yurievich, what do you think about the sanction plan? Is it work for stop Russia aggression against Ukraine? Please, very short answer, 2 minutes, because we have only 20 minutes for all our time now.
So I'll be brief. Sanctions are already working, but they need to be enhanced. So there must also be pressure, because everything that happens in Russian Federation right now, they have expenses, of course, because they need to keep on feeding money to provide for all these occupied territories. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleksii. And Matti, this is a question for you also. Will new sanctions be imposed? What do you think?
I think the EU sanctions that were introduced in 2014 and have been rolled over, prolonged ever since, have had their deterrent effect and are having the long-term effect on Russia's economy, so that they can affect Russian political leadership's course as well. But behind these sanctions stands a united European political will. And I think it can be said even a bit broader, a Western or transatlantic political will that we have witnessed here today, that goes out of the same principles that Tobias laid out earlier, of the shock of 2014, seeing that war in Europe unfortunately is possible, and the European countries and transatlantic partners must respond. And this political determination has been the most important element in this. On Crimea, we have a full set of sanctions in place that we coordinate together with the Ukraine, with the US, other partners, effectively an investment ban and everything. I come from a country that was suffering under Soviet occupation, Estonia. And we also had the non-recognition policy of this annexation. The current policy, the current sanctions on Crimea and also on Donbas are much stronger than the policy that was there. So I am optimistic, I am hopeful.
Okay, I also have a temptation for me to say something about sanctions, because I'm from Donbas region and I know what does it mean occupation for my region now, for my city. But I want to know what's think about that, Kurt Volker, please.
Well, I think it's certainly possible that we will see new sanctions against Russia. The Congress is the lead on this right now, and they're putting through legislation that will increase sanctions. And I think the incoming administration will not want to be in a position of opposing that. So it is likely that we would see some new ones. As for the efficacy of sanctions, I do believe that they make a difference. I think that they have caused Russia to pause in its aggression against Ukraine or others in the neighborhood. They've not gone further to attack Baltic states, for example. So I think they have had some deterrent effect on actions that might have happened. And in addition, they do cause a pressure on the Russian system as well. And I know that the Russian business leaders and elites would love to see them lifted. What I always say about sanctions is that they don't work until the day they do. And I think it's important to take those steps to demonstrate that we understand the situation, we are pushing back, and it is Russia's responsibility to resolve it.
And please, Ambassador Filkuzen, what do you think about does new sanction work in the future?
I can only, or I could only repeat what my colleague from the EU and what Kurt Volker has said. I think sanctions had their effect, and Germany is a very strong supporter of continuing with these sanctions from the EU vis-à-vis Russia. Let me nevertheless say that at the same time, German support for Ukraine aims at making Ukraine more prosperous, more welcoming country, more modern country, and that we want Ukraine to become more resilient, that the whole of Ukraine can withstand Russia's aggression better, that Ukraine is firm on its path towards Euro and Euro-Atlantic integration. And I think that is the best protection Ukraine can have next to everything else where we have less influence on.
Okay, and next mic for France Ambassador Pansin, please.
Just to say that yesterday in Brussels they have confirmed once again the sanction towards Russia. So now these instruments exist and it's applied on a regular basis. I want also to highlight that we are 1 year after the Paris summit, Normandy format in France, and we have seen some progress since, even if they are not sufficiently important from our point of view. But anyway, if we look back, we can be satisfied with the exchange of prisoners, for example, and more importantly, with the ceasefire that is lasting since July now, and it has had a very good impact on the morale and on the situation on the ground. So I just want to highlight that the solution should be political, and that we should continue to press for a political dialogue. And in this respect, the Normandy format has demonstrated, I would say, that first it exists, and it is a place where progress can be made.
Okay, Ambassador Tiberg, your opinion and Sweden perspective on the sanctions, and what do you think about that?
I agree with Matti. I agree with Anka. I agree with Mr. Volker. Number one, sanctions are an important part of the Western transatlantic response to the aggression taking place in Ukraine today. We believe that they have a deterrent effect. Number two, equally importantly, they are the most important manifestation of unity in Europe in our position on what's happening in Ukraine today. Nothing could be clearer in expressing the unity of the member states of the European Union and our partners outside the European Union, that what's happening in Ukraine today is not acceptable. And I think that's a very important political signal. Number three, the point that I would just like to conclude with: why are sanctions here? Sanctions are here because international law is being violated in Ukraine today. Sanctions are here because the European security order is being undermined in Ukraine today. And Sweden is of the opinion that sanctions need to remain in place until those issues are resolved.
Thank you. Ambassador Simmons, will something change after Brexit in the sanctions policy towards Russia? What do you think?
Thank you. Well, of course, when we were in the EU, we were very strong supporters of sanctions. And it's great to see that the EU is continuing with that strength of common purpose on sanctions. We agree completely that it's a very powerful tool for keeping Russia at the negotiating table. And I absolutely agree with my colleague Tobias's analysis about why sanctions have come about. So it should not be surprising, really, that on departure from the EU, the UK is developing a bilateral sanctions regime, which will complement sanctions regimes in international organizations, because it's that powerful a tool. So more on that to come.
Okay, and the last voice in this part of the questions and roundtable, Ruslan Katz from Canada Embassy, please.
Yes, well, I completely agree with what has been said. I think our sanctions regime is very much aligned with the US and with the EU, and it is there to remain. I think that we understand that the Russian aggression in Ukraine is not only a threat for Ukraine; it is a threat to all of us, to the rules-based international order which we have all built collectively after the Second World War. And therefore, we believe that this strong position against Russia is extremely essential. Our Prime Minister has been very vocal to say, for example, that Russia would never reintegrate the G7 until it stops its aggression against Ukraine. And I completely agree with Ambassador Feldhusen on the fact that a stronger, more prosperous, democratic, reformed Euro-Atlantic Ukraine is the best response that we can give to Russia, and it's the best way to show that Russia will fail or have failed. And therefore, I think all of the reforms, the judicial sector reform, creating a better investment climate in Ukraine, showing the Ukrainian people that their future is in Europe and in the Euro-Atlantic community, it's the best way to respond to the Russian aggression, in addition to the political track.
Okay, thank you, ambassadors. And the last part of our questions, it is, we know that Many Western countries provide humanitarian aid to conflict-affected regions. We heard in your remarks about that. If we talk about political issues and security, in particular, what options are there for international cooperation now? What do you think about that? About this question? And we start with this answer. Kurt Volker, please say what do you think about that? About international cooperation for the future, for the next steps.
The first thing is to remember that the Minsk agreements and the Normandy format serve an important purpose. And that is, these are the written legal documents, the Minsk agreements in particular, where Russia commits to respect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and also the basis of EU sanctions against Russia. We need to maintain these. The problem with the Minsk agreements is that they're not being implemented by Russia. They have refused to withdraw foreign forces from Ukrainian territory. And this is where the Normandy format is meant to increase some pressure on Russia to follow through on its obligation, but it is not serving that purpose well. There, I think you do need greater international attention, including from the United States, from Germany as a country, from the UK, from Canada, from NATO perhaps as well, to call attention to Russia's failure to implement the Minsk agreements and to insist that there be follow-through in order to restore Ukraine's sovereignty.
Thank you, Kurt. It was opinion Kurt Volker from Washington, D.C. And next, our speaker, Ambassador Matsuka, please, your opinion about the international cooperation in political and security issues toward Donbas and their reintegration and reconciliation process.
This whole session has been about political
but
cooperation.
This is international focus.
We are, each and every European Union decision is a result of an intense international process. All the coordination we spoke about with transatlantic partners and now the United Kingdom is international cooperation. The Ukrainian government has been very active in initiating discussions, cooperation on international fora in international organizations like the United Nations and the OSCE. The Ukrainian government has recently come out with an initiative on Crimea, the Crimean Platforma. This all is daily international cooperation with the aim of having this solved.
Okay, I want to clarify, because I heard your reflection about that, but I want to clarify the question for Ambassador Ponsen. How you estimate the openness of Ukrainian government to Western cooperation? What do you think?
I do think that the Ukrainian government is very open to foreign investment and to project. I have a very good and friendly relationship with Deputy Prime Minister Reznikov, so they are very open. The problem we are facing as international investors is more about the lack of rule of law, and this debate which is horizontal. It's not only about Donbas; it's all over Ukraine. And this concern that we have expressed together with EU colleagues and others about the situation, the reform of the judiciary, the reform of the anti-corruption elements, and so on and so forth. Do not to deviate from your debate, but it's clear that it has to be put in the broader picture of the situation and of the reforms in Ukraine following the Maidan revolution.
Okay. Ambassador Fliguzin, we in Ukraine, we really feel supporting from Germany, from Western countries here. But what do you feel from Ukraine side? Is it the same feelings like Ukraine support Western way and want to build more strong connection with Western allies, or what? How you say answer for that?
Oleksii, I have the privilege to already spend my 10th year in Ukraine since '94. So I can really confirm, I feel the vast majority of the Ukrainian population and also this government and this president very committed to their European future. Whenever you talk to somebody, this is where people want to go. This is how they want to live in a European Ukraine. I have no doubts about that. And if we hear other voices, those are voices of a minority, or they are voices that repeat a Russian narrative, and we shouldn't listen to them. And Ukraine has achieved a lot of progress on that path. Let me just mention the granting of EOP status in NATO this year, of this enhanced opportunity partnership program. This is one clear sign that NATO and Ukraine want to cooperate much closer. The other being, but I don't want to say something my EU colleague should say, is of course the association agreement. There will be an update of the association agreement. These are very concrete steps for Ukraine on its way to a more European future. And there's so much to do, indeed. We need better conditions for our investors here. I have repeated it again and again in the last months. We need sustainable judicial reform, because this is what our investors most lack here, the security that they can defend their rights in front of the courts.
Absolutely, yes, thank you. And Melinda, Ambassador Simmons, please, what do you think about how Britain will continue to build relationships with Ukraine in the next future?
Well, as you know, the President signed our strategic partnership agreement with the Prime Minister in October. And though the central focus of that was a bilateral trade agreement that was related, of course, to our departure from the EU, and it's a really great agreement. The point about it is that it's not just about trade. The agreement in totality includes a joint signing up to shared principles and shared values. It talks about Ukraine's territorial integrity. It talks about a systemic commitment by the UK to support that, as well as now investing more in Ukraine's economic development and thinking more in terms of trade as well as governance, as well as conflict. So it brings the relationship up to quite a mature partnership. So I'm actually quite excited about the UK-Ukraine relationship going forward. And the appointment of our first ever trade envoy for Ukraine is a signal, really, of that increasingly increased intensity, increased depth of cooperation between the two. So I'm optimistic. Thank you.
Okay, Ambassador Tiberg, we know that Sweden does a lot for civil society, and I want to focus on East regions. What the next projects for East regions of Ukraine, Donbas region? Maybe you can open some additional information for the next plans of Sweden embassy on that regions.
The first thing I'd like to say is that we're following with great interest the plans that the Deputy Prime Minister Reznikov is currently working on to not only focus on resolution of the conflict with Russia, but to also work on reintegration of Ukrainians who are currently living in parts of Ukraine which are outside the Ukrainian control. I can't say here and now how we will respond to those strategies and those policies, but we're following with great interest. In Sweden, I'm convinced will contribute to policies which are based on good evidence and which have the prospect for integrating occupied Donbass with the rest of the country. I'd also just like to echo what Anka and other colleagues have said. First of all, I fully believe that Ukraine is on a solid path of continuing European integration. But number two, I also think it is extremely important that Ukraine works very hard on its judicial system, on strengthening the rule of law, all of which will not only benefit Ukrainian citizens, but will also strengthen Ukraine's resilience to threats coming both from outside and from inside.
Ruslan Katz, please, your perspective from Canada about the future international cooperation with Ukraine, and also if we say about security questions and reconciliation questions in Donbass.
Sure. Well, as you know, our relationship with Ukraine is very solid and very long. The first Ukrainian immigration to Canada started over 125 years ago, and as you know, we have the largest community of Ukrainians in the world after Russia. And so our relationship beyond politics, beyond governments, is really based on those very, very strong people-to-people ties. And I think that our commitment, first and above all, our commitment is to the Ukrainian people. I have mentioned earlier this unconditional love. This unconditional love across Canada for Ukraine and for its people is there to remain. The choices will have to be Ukrainian choices. It will have to be owned by Ukraine, and we will be here to support the path that the Ukrainian people will choose. As I have mentioned before, we have new projects about service delivery, about economical prosperity, and I think that going for the future, our support will be very much focused on encouraging this national conversation, this national dialogue, to help to rebuild social cohesion, to help to build a stronger social fabric across Ukraine, with a very strong role for the women and for all Ukrainian citizens, to make sure that once the reintegration happens, politically, from a security point of view, the country is ready to be fully reintegrated and reconciled. As you know, we have a military training mission with Operation Unifier. We have our military in the Baltic. So we also understand, once again, that a threat which happens in Ukraine is a threat to our whole European, Euro-Atlantic security. And as Russia tries to disrupt our unity, tries to disrupt the values on which our community is built, we will continue to invest very heavily into this whole transatlantic security in Ukraine and across the whole alliance.
Thank you, ambassadors. Thank you, participants of this roundtable. And this time for a short sum up. During the panel, we have discussed the contribution of European countries and the United States of America to the process of Donbas reintegration and humanitarian efforts to support vulnerable groups. All speakers have agreed that human connections could be the cornerstone for the future integration and the growth of trust to the government of Ukraine among residents of uncontrolled Donbas. All speakers have confirmed their commitment to support Ukraine in its struggle for sovereignty and territorial integrity. Participants declared their willingness to increase their involvement in the peace process. Significant achievements in the peace process were demonstrated during this year, and the most important of them is reaching the stable ceasefire in the east of Ukraine. This undeniable success should be reinforced by further steps of Ukrainian authority toward the people living on the uncontrolled territory. Beside economic development, accountable authorities, transparent budget, and security reforms will be the key elements which will ensure the unity of Ukrainian society. Thank you very much for our viewers and the TV channel Dom for organizing this great event. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleksii.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.